The Jetsons, 1963, Issue 5. The cover feels like advertising Rosie being featured in the comic, so it must be pretty early as an issue. Because in the original show from the 60s, she only appeared in 2 episodes, which would only make sense if those episodes were in a parallel universe. The cover spelled Rosie wrong, somehow. I just looked it up on TV Tropes, I know this is wrong. There's things it's okay to do differently for an adaptation for the sake of being creative, but misspelling the name of one of the most important characters isn't it, because it doesn't take creative talent. And they're gonna keep doing this. George gets mad about a bill that came in, which Elroy already knows, as he's flying in a toy jet. You'd think you'd have to build it to get one, because even hoverboards would be getting kids hurt ridiculously often. Rosie brings some water to relax him. He thanks her, and thankfully actually doesn't get sabotaged by the water he drank in some way. He's mad at her because of a bill from the mechanical maid maintenance company for her. Jane tries to get him to feel better and agrees to shake her hand. He arbitrarily gets shocked, and she says she must have had a short circuit and would need a new electrical system. She figures out she's in trouble because of this, and he apologizes and fires her, literally sending her into a trash can from the tube. He reassures her that Rosie was just a machine. How is this still an attitude for him, in a world where all the maids are robots? She expects me to believe that she's upset because of all the work she has to do now. It's hard to take her seriously here, because I didn't see her doing any work until Rosie. Not even in the story where he was overworking to help his family. I guess that's because none of the work involved cleaning, as she cleans the windows. She wouldn't do that manually unless her house couldn't afford to have robot hands clean every window, and instead only did that for one. He sits on a floor waxing machine, and yet thinks this is rugged living when it's doing all the work. He must have done actually exhausting things before this. Why does he even need to sit on it? Does he have to aim it? He wants to take a rest on the chair, but finds out Astro's hogging it. And he asks to pull him away from it because it's accustomed to only obeying Rosie. Really? And not everyone else in the house? Yeah, right, he's his master in the show. Judy's current boyfriend says he wants Rosie to listen to the hum in his car and tell him what's wrong with it. As opposed to Elroy, the inventor. He only invents things. He knows nothing about space mobiles, apparently. But still, I'd expect him to do this before Rosie, when she's only programmed to be a maid, not know about cars just because she's a robot, which isn't a car. I have to assume she researched how cars work in her spare time. Her boyfriend says in front of her that he plans to go visit another girl she knows, because she's got a new model maid that likes cars too. Judy cries because she really gets attached to her every boyfriend of the day. And Elroy reminds his father that Rosie always reads him a bedtime story at nap time. It's not nap time, it's bedtime. Why would he nap? He said he doesn't allow himself any time off. Guess he changed his mind. It's weird for a maid to read the bedtime stories. Well, not that I would know. But I understand someone never wanting to do that. For once his genius is used, because his bedtime story was over 200 pages. Somehow he's surprised that a non-robot didn't have the book memorized. Is he able to memorize books too? He cries with the word where written like we're supposed to hate him. Jane can't figure out the code for dinner, even though she'd have them all written down somewhere. Rosie's barely in the original episodes. How is she this dependent on her? George hopes he could drive to the trash blast pad in time. Can't find her in the trash rocket, and a convenience robot laying about is here to help. He tells him she's snatched up an antique sweeper and headed for the litter along the monorailway. Realistically, as a maid robot, she didn't feel content with just doing nothing, so she's found sweeping litter. She finds a paper containing a convenient chemical formula and says to turn it into the lost and found at the police station. It's a formula for instant tennis shoes, which blew out of his pocket through the monorail window. So he hands out a reward that's enough to pay for her maintenance expenses. It's a very convenient surprise, but not impossible, so it's not a deus ex machina. Surprisingly, she ends up threatening to adopt a nicer family and accusing them of not really caring about her. Since she agrees right away to stay with them in exchange for a day off once a month, starting today, I wonder if she only did this as a ploy, because it's not like her. She says she'd stay home on her day off, and the story ends with Elroy giving her a drink as she's on the couch, George bringing her some more, and Judy dusting her head. It's sweet to see her have no problem at all with doing chores. In the next story, George drives off with Astro in the front seat, saying that he's going bird hunting with him. I hate that Astro's talking like Scooby-Doo now. How can he talk at all? This comic must predate the show by quite a bit and just didn't have his staff find out it had to do this until now. He said beep bird for a reason, as Jane says that in modern hunting no animals get hurt. A beeping little plane flies near George, as I think that it'd be absolutely ridiculous if that was what the hunted animals looked like. If they looked nothing like animals, and weren't even shaped like them, it'd remove most of the appeal of hunting. I'm sure people can make this little plane look like a bird. There's a sign saying to get your scoreboard punched when you turn in your beep birds, and Astro falls over from the car stopping because he insisted on being in the front seat where he could distract the driver for some reason. And George let him for no reason. George easily shoots the beep bird with electricity to short out its electromagnetic field, and tells Astro to go fetch. And it turns out it fell on a fugitive in the dump. His friend scares away Astro with the robot bird, so Astro runs away and doesn't come back, even though he was fearless about fighting a burglar the first time he showed up. The minute his back was turned, he would be vulnerable to being bitten anyways. Astro brings George the fin of a space car, which panics him into thinking he damaged someone's car, and apologizing, getting the attention of the criminals who want a chance to get extra money. The criminals move the wrecked car out in the shooting range area, and George gets fooled by one that pretends to be hurt in it. The other guy conveniently finds what looks like a doctor's bag and runs up to George pretending to be a doctor. George fortunately lampshades that it's lucky a doctor was passing by. The criminal says he has no money to pay the bill because there's no health care in a future America either, so George agrees to pay the expenses. I can't help but feel exhausted at yet another pair of criminal antagonists. Still, I wish Sonic had way more villains like this. Nothing that's trying too hard to be taken seriously, where their only goal is to try to kill the heroes when you know they're gonna fail. It's far more grounded and believable and interesting to just have criminals that want money, which is instantly relatable. The fake doctor confuses them by settling for just the money he has. Astro runs at him angrily, and this makes the criminal raise the bag, which has brushes fall out of it, getting George to figure out he's not a doctor. One of the criminals quickly thinks to punch George, and the other runs away. George complains that he's out of luck because his electronic rifle only stops electronic devices, not criminals. Even if he did have a gun, he'd be charged for using against them anyways, so that still wouldn't be better than Astro's solution. Astro brings him the beep bird so he could reset its circuit breaker like the man at the gate does, letting it fly again. He throws it to knock both of them out. The story ends with them hanging off the end of his space mobile outside of its dome as he's bringing them to the police department. And it's charming that he says he feels like an old-fashioned deer hunter. In the next story, an alarm comes out of the wall to tell Elroy good morning and sing, and its robot hands move his blankets when he says he wants to sleep longer, making you feel sorry for him. He wouldn't waste the time saying this. If he should know, the robot hands would pull off his pajama shirt anyways. His mom says he has a bright and shiny face this morning, and he says it's because he bent over to look at his shoes while the automatic shoe shiner is still shining it. A machine feeds him cereal, and she warns him not to talk. He'd know better. He also finds it annoying that his hand wipes his mouth with a napkin, and he's a slob, unnecessarily wishing he could wipe it on his sleeve. That doesn't seem like him. He wants to run to the tube, and Rosie picks him up, refusing to let him raise dust when there's clearly no dirt on the floor. And it's not like she does this every time anyone runs in the house, ever. And walking would also raise dust by that logic. I guess this was supposed to be funny by everyone noticing this plot hole. I wonder what took him so long to have these problems with all of these machines when they're part of his daily schedule. Jane presses a button on the tube for school, with the other buttons being for a playground, work, spaceport, and the shopping center. The text box says in modern classrooms, no one can get in trouble because they're trapped in their tubes. It wants you to feel creeped out, but I also can't help but appreciate that nobody's getting detention or hitting the other students. The students are told to look on the math screen with their earphones on, and he's at least appreciative for technology in one way. That he's only in school 2 hours. Still, I doubt it'd only be 2 hours. He tells Jane he wants to go get exercise when he could do that anywhere by running around, so I guess he just wants a break from all the machines at home. She wants to send him to the playground, but he says the equipment gets all the exercise, not the kids there. Somehow, Jane didn't know this and doesn't admit he's right and try to come up with another idea. Instead, she tries to shame him by saying out of complete nowhere that it costs a lot of money to build that playground, as if it has anything to do with him, as if it was built for him. But that has nothing to do with his argument. How is he supposed to get exercise? When she made a clever plan in issue 1, I wondered if he got the brains from her, because George is usually an idiot, but she's only smart compared to George. He says he'll do his homework and appreciates that punching a pencil is doing at least a little exercise. His book gives him an idea and he does wire switching, so when he tells Jane to bring him to the playground, I guess he'll be sent somewhere. Then she sees rain clouds outside, inconveniently taking until now to see them, when she might have seen that window a lot that day passing by it. So she would have sprayed a raincoat on him already from force of habit. So she wouldn't have ever dialed the playground attendant and found out she didn't send Elroy there. This isn't fair. She calls her husband home, and he knows about technology again because only he knows the tubes are leak-proof. He finds out the wire switching happened, and Jane jumps to the conclusion that he's outright running away from home because somehow a person who's usually the optimist jumps to the worst case scenario twice. A guy accepting spaceport tickets tells George that he saw Elroy head down the moon tunnel, and George hopes he didn't go on the moon rocket. He runs into Elroy, who says what they should have already known, that he loves his family too much to go to the cold moon, and only came here because it's good exercise sliding in the long passages. Though he should have left a note. What's sweet is that not only are they not mad at him, but George says this is fun. Elroy says everything at home is automatic, and George says if they turn off the main power switch for an hour at home every day, they'll get enough exercise. The story ends with Elroy looking forward to the hour being done as he was running around a lot. And it's amusing to see Jane climb up a rope to get through the tube and call it primitive. In the next story, Judy's current boyfriend is desperate enough to prove he can be good for something other than talking about hot rods because he can wiggle his ears. And she calls this behavior strictly prehistoric. I kinda like that the series has her with a new guy every day, because it might actually be trying to tell us we don't have to care about her relationship drama. We might feel pressured to care if she had the same guy longer, because we'd hope this one stuck around. But all of her boyfriends sucked so far even then. For once we see a relationship of hers end, and she dumps him. He doesn't accept it, and says he'll call her when she's feeling better. She somehow says she wishes she knew where to get a He-Man boyfriend. Really? After all of her boyfriends, she doesn't know right away? I'm sure she knows she has an insane supply of them at school. She calls her friend at school on the video phone, who's coincidentally also upset about a breakup. And a bigger coincidence is that she broke up with the captain of the school football team, Brick. Exactly what she wants. I mean, football team. This better be different enough to be interesting. Who would name their kid Brick anyways? It's nice of Judy to tell her where to find her ex-boyfriend, but it's also common sense. She might find it mandatory to keep her from getting back together with her ex. Luckily, again, Susan thinks Judy's ex is cute. And since Judy's a cheerleader, she thinks it'll be easy to become close to Brick. She says hi, and the school mascot dog licks her while he walks by her uninterested. Either he's gay or he thinks she's not good looking enough, because this is a teenage boy. Not that you could tell by his face, so you'd think she'd have no trouble getting him to date her. Her cheerleading is ignored because, go figure, he's too busy playing football, where he has to catch it and the players are flying. She decides to pretend she's cheering and accidentally landed on the spongy ball field. She gets bounced into him, and he catches her and gets bashful at her, saying she's so happy to meet him because he's so big, when he's barely bigger than the other guys. Nothing like Moose, because it's the future where the guys are weak. He bets she says that to all the foosball players, who he's not ashamed to call handsome, because he somehow noticed that about them. But that doesn't stop him from calling Judy a cutie, so why did he ignore her when she was so obviously trying to talk to him earlier? Judy says Rosie has a busy gear to make her work faster. I guess it's bad for her to expend too much energy, so she can't always have it activated. Judy just pressed the maid button, and there's also a pest remover button near the lights and window opener buttons. The button lifts the couch, revealing Elroy trying to spy on her from boredom. I was already under the assumption that he'd stand her up, and her hoping he won't made it even more obvious. Instantly I looked at the next panel where it's been over an hour. Brick shows up after all, and says he was only late because he missed the turnoff on the spaceway, something that wouldn't matter because he could fly up or down. Unless there were space mobiles above and below his car literally the whole time he was driving. That can't be it, as he had to orbit all around the Earth to get back to the same place again. And you'd think, there's no way there could be space mobiles above and below his car the whole time he was driving all the way around the Earth. Couldn't he just fly anywhere in the world, so he'd be able to turn around and get to her easily? How overpopulated is this planet that there's so many space mobiles? The space mobiles on inhabited planets must only be able to fly in the designated airways with an onboard computer restricting them. Whenever we look at the sky in the Jetsons, most of it doesn't have a car in it. So yeah, you would imagine that in most situations, he wouldn't be completely surrounded by cars. If the writer knew to ever ask him how he could be that dumb, it shouldn't have been written. Even being tired from a foosball game wouldn't justify this mistake. This mistake would only be justified if he intentionally missed the turnoff because he doesn't want to date her. Again, maybe because he found out he's gay and only called her a cutie to hide it, and I know that couldn't be the writer's intention in the 60s, but that's actually interesting and at least has evidence to have it make sense, as opposed to what I'm supposed to believe. The only other reason why someone wouldn't date her would be that she dates a lot of guys, so maybe it could be a common assumption that she dumps them for the slightest reason and gets interested in other guys too easily, discouraging some guys from wanting to give her a chance. And he only agreed to the date because he was too polite to say no. Not all guys are discouraged, which is why she still gets boyfriends. He takes a nap on his feet, and she has to wake him up. And somehow, he asks who's calling the signals and jumps talking to a coach that isn't there. He'd never think the coach was here, and he'd know he was hearing a female voice right away. He has to be doing this on purpose. But there's no excuse, as it could have broken off the date back in school. He breaks the ultra-solar lamp. I hope that means it's powered by solar energy. Why does it have the word ultra there? He reveals that he's just like her last boyfriend, and she screams for help. It's convenient that at this very moment, her ex gets brought to her by Susan because she's sick of hearing about hot rods. What I notice is that Brick calls Susan my favorite female friend. What a stilted line. Judy gets back with her boyfriend, which is clearly only because there isn't a guy she likes right next to her. Why does she double date with Brick after he annoyed her? Brick's relationship problems with his ex wouldn't have gone away after all of this. So why did they get back together when obviously they could find someone else? They think they have to date each other because he can't find anyone else at the moment willing to date them. Maybe he just wants people to know he's got a girlfriend all the time. The first story is about George having to fire Rosie for needing a new electrical system he can't afford, but his family gets made miserable by her absence because George doesn't have a bedtime story memorized, and the book's probably nowhere to be found. Judy has a problem that could have easily not happened, and Jane was probably dumb enough to recycle the paper containing all the codes for the food machine and forget one of them after all of her experience with using it. Jane's mistake was the hardest to believe. She's barely in the show at first, she wouldn't be that dependent on Rosie. George finds her at the dump eventually, and she lucks out finding a lost chemical formula someone conveniently lost, which had to be written to get George the money to afford her because there's still that problem to deal with. The second story is about Astro going hunting with George and eventually making sure some criminals get arrested. And then there's the story where Elroy can't get exercise because the futuristic city he's in. And then his parents only think he ran away and go to find him. Judy's story is about Judy trying to get a captain of the football team to date her, which would normally be a cliche, mundane plot because it only requires sci-fi for her to get in his arms, when I'd think she wouldn't need that to get his attention anyways. But she does because for no explained reason he doesn't respond when she tries to call out for him in a clearly flirtatious way, which would only make sense if he was ignoring her from lack of interest. But I assume she's pretty as she's got tons of boyfriends, so how? Then when she launches herself into his arms and asks him out, only when the coach sees them does he agree and call her cutie, which confuses me as he would have noticed she was a cutie and responded to her before this if he could really be interested in her. Combine that with him being impossibly stupid at the date itself. He shows up late from an impossible mistake when his car can fly three-dimensionally, naps standing up, then acts like he thought a coach was waking him up, making a pass, and breaking her lamp. The story would only make sense if he never actually wanted to date her, but for some reason he didn't feel like saying no in front of the coach and football players who'd have extra pressure on him to be like a normal guy. He didn't have the heart to tell her no, so he screwed up the date on purpose. Still doesn't justify it, because it would have been better if he called her a minute later explaining that he doesn't want to date her, instead of putting himself through driving for an hour, and upsetting her a lot more than he would have if he broke off the date. He could have lied and just set off from home an hour late. On the bright side, for the story making actual sense, it's still possible that him being gay isn't why he didn't want to date the most dated girl in school. He could just be put off by her having such a high failure rate for relationships. Or he's not over his ex yet. He just got dumped by her after all, and they got back together at the end. But since the relationship problems wouldn't have been resolved, I think she settled for him because she doesn't have another guy asking her out that she likes yet. Maybe it's true for him too, and they'll drop each other as soon as they have an excuse. And maybe just really wants to have a reputation as someone who has a girlfriend. I'm sure most teenage guys would want to be known as having a girlfriend for bragging rights, but I wish it was for the interesting reason, so it wouldn't just be a cliche, boring plot that doesn't need sci-fi technology to happen. I certainly don't want relationship stuff to be the whole thing I'm talking about with the Jetsons plot. It could have been more interesting if it was written now, so it could be intentional. Him ignoring her could be passed off as what I said before, or just preferring brunettes that much. But the real kicker is that he called the other football players handsome, and he's not joking. When he'd have known that handsome was already implied in what he was saying to her because of the context, and the average guy would have never felt comfortable saying it. It's just one word, but in light of the rest of the story, it's a big deal. He probably wouldn't have been written to say handsome if this was written a little later. The only other thing interesting is how foosball is different from football.